We're going to look at a lesson from Jonah in the book of Jonah, where a lot of our scriptures, if not all of them, are going to come from. Book of Jonah in the Old Testament. This is a very common book. There's been a lot of lessons from it. And I've had one called, The Man Who Ran from God, The Man Who Disagreed with God, and all sorts of things. It's a book that everybody knows because of the story about Jonah was swallowed by the great fish. And a lot of people have problems with that. I know one person who didn't, and that was Jesus Christ, because when he was talking about his resurrection, he said that he would be in the grave 3 days the way that Jonah was in the belly of the fish. So what I figured is if Jesus thought it was a true story, then maybe I ought to. There's a lot of lessons that we can learn from this book. But I think I'm going to hit on one that I don't think I really paid much attention to. And so to do that, I think I want us to first look at Jonah and look at Nineveh and see what happened and get maybe what I think was the real message of Jonah. The first thing we have to think about is, how sinful was Nineveh? Nineveh was so sinful that God was going to send Jonah to them. We'll read Jonah, the first chapter, and we're going to read verses 1 and 2. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for their evil has come up before me. There were many sinful countries and cities at that time that God didn't think it was necessary to send somebody to. So the best I can figure is that they must have been really, really bad. That he thought it was important that they either repent or be destroyed. They had reached that point. But God, being a merciful God, wanted to warn them, and he wanted to send Jonah. Verse 3 says, But Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He didn't want to go. Well, he wasn't afraid of traveling because he went to Tarshish. He did not like the Ninevites. He wasn't unwilling to serve God. Otherwise, God wouldn't have chosen him. But he didn't want to save the Ninevites. Turn to Jonah, the 4th chapter, verses 1 and 2. And this is after the Ninevites have repented, and God has decided not to destroy them. But it displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he was angry. And he prayed to the Lord and said, O Lord, is not this what I said when I was yet in my country? That is why I made haste to flee to Tarshish. For I knew that you are a gracious God and a merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and relenting from disaster. Jonah had something against Nineveh. We don't know what. We don't have any idea. Maybe he just didn't like Nineveh. There's so many reasons that people hate and dislike that it's hard to tell. There's, I can remember when I was in college, we were going out into the community to raise money for Ibaraki Christian College in Japan. I mean, you know, it was a long time ago, you know, in the 60s. World War II had been over quite a long time. Because it was over before I was born. I'm in college. And we went to one person, and he said, I wouldn't get blankety blank for blankety blank 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 for them blankety blank Jacks. They killed my brother and not mine. That person was prejudiced against the Japanese for a reason. When my dad was in the home, he didn't remember much, but he remembered the Japs. He blamed all of his aches and pains on them. He came back without any injuries, so I don't know why, but in his mind, the thing is discrimination and hate sometimes has a reason. It's going to be really hard to ever have peace in the Middle East because there's been so much blood shed on both sides and nobody wants to stop till their blood has been avenged. And it'll never happen. But here's Jonah, and we don't know why he's prejudiced against Nineveh. But he is so prejudiced that even though he's the kind of a person that God wanted to send, he didn't want to go. He was willing to try to run from God so he didn't have to be the one to do it. He didn't want it done at all, period. But he certainly didn't want to be the one to bring about the saving of Nineveh from destruction. He was really pleased. God's going to destroy Nineveh. Good. That's what I want. You want me to tell them so they won't? No, I don't want to do that. No, I want them gone. That's mine. We can, as human beings, we can understand Jonah. There's a lot of things that God tells us to do that we don't really want to do sometimes. And that's where Jonah was. He was a very faithful Jew. He did all the things he was supposed to do. And in the Old Testament, that was a lot. He had to do a lot of things. And that was fine. But he didn't want the Ninevites to repent. He wanted them destroyed. So much that he wanted to run away. Well, well, maybe he was just a bad person. Maybe God decided to use a bad person to preach to him. I mean, after all, God used sinful nations to punish Israel. Well, maybe Jonah wasn't all that good. Well, let's turn to back to the first chapter of Jonah. And we'll read verses 7 through 12 to see the kind of man that Jonah was. There's this terrible storm. The ship's being tossed about. It's having a real problem. It's almost ready to go down. I don't have any experience with that. The only ships I've ever been on were doing really fine, and they weren't having any problem. But if you've ever seen the movie The Perfect Storm, that's what this picture is. They're on there, and that storm is too much for the boat. It's going to be going down. And they said to one another, "Come, let us cast lots, that we may know on whose account this evil has come upon us." So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. They said, "This is not normal. This storm is not just something that's just happening. God is angry with us. Somebody did something, and we're all paying the price." So they cast lots, and the lot said, "It's Jonah." Well, if we're about to go down on a ship, and everybody is scared and angry, and they go, "Okay, let's figure out who," and my name comes up, I'm afraid first thing I'm going to do is say, "No, not me, no, you pick on somebody else, no. Those lots are wrong, you're just superstitious." I don't believe in lying, but you've got a whole crew of angry, scared men. I think the first thing most people would do is lie. And then they said to him, "Tell us on whose account this evil has come upon us. What is your occupation? Where do you come from? And what is your country? And of what people are you?" And he said to them, "I am a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." Then the men were exceedingly afraid and said to him, "What is this that you have done?" For the men knew that he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord, because he had told them. Then they said to him, "What shall we do to you, that the sea may quiet down for us?" For the sea grew more and more tempestuous. Well, guys, I think we all get together and we need to pray real loud. That's what I say. We just need to pray more, right? But what he said to them, "Pick me up and hurl me into the sea. Then the sea will quiet down for you. For I know it is because of me that this great tempest has come upon you." That shows the kind of man that Jonah was. Even though he hates the Ninevites so much that he will run from God, he didn't lie and say, "Well, it's not my fault." He didn't say, "Well, let's just pray and we'll get through it." He goes, "No, it's my fault. And just toss me in the ocean, because it's me that God's mad at. He's not mad at you. Just toss me in the ocean." That takes a pretty good man to say, "It's okay. let me die. I would rather me die than in trying to save my life, I take you with me. That's a pretty good human being. But there's an awful lot of people who wouldn't do that. And that's what I want us to see, is that Jonah is what I would say is a sterling character, except for one fault. He doesn't love his neighbor. He doesn't love his neighbor, which God said was something that they all should do, even in the Old Testament. We read last week Matthew 22:39, when he said there was a second commandment like unto the first. Love your neighbor. Love your neighbor. Jonah did not love his neighbor. He was prejudiced against the Ninevites. Who knows, it may have been for a real good reason. Even though he was a sterling character, he had a fault. He let his dislike of the Ninevites poison his relationship with God. Now the thing is we see his relationship with God being poisoned as he ran. His relationship with God was already poisoned because he didn't love his neighbor. In fact, one of the messages of the book of Jonah is there were two lessons to be learned. One by Nineveh and one by Jonah. God picked Jonah to go because Jonah needed a lesson. God could certainly have picked somebody else to go. Somebody that wasn't prejudiced and would go, yeah, I'll go, and wouldn't that be cool? Wouldn't that be cool to be chosen of God to go to a nation and knowing, like Jonah did, that it would work? Can just imagine God looking down and calling your name. I want you to go to Washington, D.C. I want you to go stand at the Lincoln Memorial, and I want you to tell this nation that I am coming to destroy it, and it needs to get right, and they're going to listen. I'll tell you right now, I'd be in my car heading toward Washington, D.C. Because what a thrill to go and do that and go back home going, God used me in such a wonderful way. Wow, that would be so cool. There must have been thousands of people that God could have chosen to go and preach to the Ninevites. But he chose the one man who wouldn't go. Because the Ninevites were not the only ones who were going to be punished by God. Jonah thought he was a righteous man. He thought he was on God's side. But God had to wake him up and let him know. We're now going to go to the part where you can see just how displeased Jonah is. After, when we read in the 4th chapter, verses 1 and 2, verse 3 goes, "Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it's better for me to die than to live. I am so upset with what I do that I'm the reason that Nineveh wasn't destroyed. I just as soon die. There's no reason for me to live anymore because I've just done something terrible." In his mind, that was terrible. He truly wanted the Ninevites to be destroyed. And the Lord said, "Do you do well to be angry?" When you translate the Bible, you try to be as accurate in the words that you use as possible. But sometimes it really doesn't do good. Sometimes you have to change it into words that people understand. Because when I read, "Do you do well to be angry?" Have you ever said that? Do you do well to be angry? Should you be angry? Nobody's ever told me, "Do you do well to be angry?" But some people said, "Should you really be angry? Why are you angry? What's you?" Because that's what he's saying is, should you really be angry about this? And so Jonah went out of the city and sat to the east of the city, made a booth for himself there, and he sat under it in the shade till he should see what would become of the city. He's still hoping that God's going to get angry and destroy that city. Can't you just see him sitting in that little shelter he's made, and he's just sitting there looking at the city going, every second that passes by, he's going, "Come on, let's see some lightning coming down. Let me just..." But when... Now the God appointed a plant and made it come up over Jonah, that it might be a shade over his head and save him from his discomfort. Boy, that would be cool. If I was out in my backyard, the sun's beating down, if God sent a plant up to come up over my head and give me some shade, I'd like that. Well, Jonah did too. So Jonah was exceedingly glad because of the plant. But when dawn came up the next day, God appointed a worm that attacked the plant so that it withered. And when the sun rose, God appointed a scorching east wind, and the sun beat down upon the head of Jonah so that he was faint. And he asked that he might die, and said, "It is better for me to die than to live." But God said to Jonah, "Do you do well to be angry for the plant? Should you be angry that plant's not there? Should that bother you?" And Jonah goes, "Yes, I do well to be angry enough to die. Yes, God, I should be angry. I I deserve to be angry, so angry that I'd like to die. That plant is gone. Now it's hot. The city's not going to be destroyed, and I'm getting heat stroke. This is just not right. And the Lord said, you pity the plant for which you did not labor, nor did you make it grow, which came into being in a night and perished in a night. And should not I pity Nineveh, that great city in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left, and also much cattle? You're so angry that you want to die because a cotton-picking plant grew up and died, and now you're uncomfortable, and you don't think that I should have pity on 120,000 babies and toddlers? You'd rather see me pour down fire and brimstone from heaven and burn it down to the very last. Kill all those babies. And what about all the animals? If I destroy the city, you know, we have PETA that would go crazy if you killed one cow. And here's a whole bunch of them. God has, throughout His Word, told us that we need to love people. He said, love your neighbor. If you look at the Old Testament, they said, be good to the stranger within your gates. However, human beings are not very good at that. We know the story of the Good Samaritan. The Jews hated the Samaritans. I don't know why we as human beings have this desire to discriminate and hate people. We hate them because of the color of their skin or their religion or whatever. God loved Jonah enough to have him swallowed by a great fish that he might learn a lesson. I don't want God to send a great fish to swallow me up. I want to learn my lesson the easy way. One of the sins that gets good, moral, righteous people and is going to cause them to stand before their God in shame is prejudice. You can't stand before God and hate your neighbor. Can't be done. So many times we harp on being baptized for the remission of your sins, because that's what God says. We don't have a piano in our worship because God says to sing. He never says to play on an instrument. We have the Lord's Supper on the first day of the week because he says so. But that's not the only things that God says. We need, each and every one of us, to constantly look at our lives to see, do we love our neighbors? Do we have reason to dislike the Islamic terrorists? Yeah, we do. I do. There's some good reasons. There's 2 missing buildings and a whole bunch of people. That's a good reason. I've got reason to be angry. Jonah didn't have a reason to be angry, but we don't either. We need to love our neighbors, even if they're not good neighbors. And that's hard. God never said that serving him would be easy. He said the yoke would be easy. He didn't say the work we had to do while bearing the yoke would be easy, because it's not. As we look to be doctrinally correct, we need also to look to be morally correct. And to realize that people are people. You know, I have the sneaking suspicion that those Islamic terrorists think they have a good reason to hate us. I know people that think they've got good reason to hate the Jews, or to hate the blacks, or to hate the Mexicans, or to hate whoever. And every group that somebody hates has a good reason to hate them back. But God is no respecter of persons. He doesn't care if you're Hispanic. He doesn't care if you're a good old white boy from the South. He doesn't care if you're one of them old stuck-up people from Maryland. He doesn't care. Because he thinks that all people mess up. Everybody, compared to God, is a mess. Love your neighbor. Purge your heart from hate, and even from seeing a difference. Did Israel do a lot of bad things? Did God ever punish Israel? And really, people are people. People without Jesus Christ are bad. No matter how good they sing, they're bad. Purge our hearts from hatred and discrimination and fill them with the love of Christ. Because Christ loved everybody just as much as he loves you. And he loved you enough to die for you. Do you love him enough to live for him? If anybody needs to answer the invitation of public way, we would ask you to come now as we stand and as we sing.